everyone, this is just a quick note at the beginning of the video that this probably won't be the prettiest video I've ever made. A lot of the footage isn't optimal, but it does show some of the Calathea leaf problems in progress. So while it isn't the most stunning footage, it's pretty accurate. And also what I'm sharing in the video is my own experience and from my own research, so please take that as you will. And with that said, let's get started. So we're going to start with brown leaf tips and edges. The first thing that I want to mention here is about water stress. First off, this can happen before you even get your plant home. If the plant was, water stress, meaning it had too much water, or even if it didn't have enough, you might not see the results after getting your plant until it's been in your home for even a few weeks. So the best way to avoid water stress is to be diligent about testing the moisture levels in your potting soil. So for me, when the first 2 to 3 inches of potting soil are dry, I water my calatheas thoroughly. The second thing that we should talk about is tap water. Now, calatheas are in a set of plants that are sensitive to a lot of the minerals and salts, additives that you find in common tap water. What's best to use on a calathea would be rainwater, or if you don't collect your own rainwater, it would be distilled water. And the thing is that calatheas do live on the forest floor. They get rainwater that's filtered, and when we use tap water, it ends up damaging the roots. The roots are what are really sensitive, and we see the damage actually move up into the leaves, and that's when it usually becomes visible to us. Now, some people might tell you that you can leave your tap water out overnight and that things like chlorine or chloramines that are in the water will evaporate over that period of time. However, the thing is that fluorides, salts, other things are not going to evaporate, and I'm not even convinced that enough chlorine would evaporate in that time to actually make it safe to use on your calathea. So just keep in mind that if you're using tap water, you are going to more than likely see brown leaf tips and edges, and it's going to continue. The next thing that you might think about is fertilizer burn. Now, often this shows up not just in the tips of your calathea, but on the edges of your leaves all over the plant, not just the tip, but just around the full edge of the leaf. And the thing is that calatheas, just as they're sensitive to tap water, they're also quite sensitive to synthetic fertilizer. And so you definitely want to make sure that you dilute any synthetic fertilizers that you plan to use, and start out with a really weak solution and build your way up. I personally no longer use synthetic fertilizers on my calatheas just because I really got tired of worrying about which plants could take which strength before being burned. And so instead I began top dressing all of them this spring with worm castings. And that way, something like an organic fertilizer like worm castings, I don't have to worry if I'm using too much. It's not going to burn the leaves, or rather the roots, and then have the damage show up on the leaves. The last thing that I wanted to talk about around brown leaf tips and edges would be humidity. This is the #1 culprit in my house for brown leaf tips, and I've struggled with it on and off since bringing my first calathea home. And the best solution that I found is a humidifier, but I don't like to have more than one humidifier going in my house, and I have calatheas all over my house, so what do? I've tried pebble trays, I've tried misting. Pebble trays just didn't elevate humidity enough to actually be useful, and misting is a little bit controversial in the plant world. There are studies or literature that claim that it is that it's closely related to an increase in things like fungal infections in plants, potentially. There's other literature that says that relationship just really doesn't exist. However, because I don't like to risk my calatheas, I tend not to miss them. And what I do instead now is, as you can see, I've been showing the footage here, I use what are essential oil diffusers. And I don't put essential oil into the diffuser. I just put in distilled water and then I let that go. And I don't mind having a few of these going because unlike humidifiers in my house, they don't tend to end up with mold inside of them. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's why I don't like having more than one humidifier going. They need to be cleaned every few days or you're really risking growing mold in them. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was curling leaves. And so let's start with light and heat. Letting your Calathea get too close to a window to direct light or letting it get too hot, what you'll see as a result is the leaves beginning to curl, just like you see here. Now let's talk about this plant and why the leaves are curling. This is my Picturata argentea. I had taken it outside, I had sprayed it with neem oil in the shade, and even though it was in the shade, being outdoors, the light is much, much brighter, and combined with a warm summer day, the leaves curled within 15 minutes. So keep that in mind. If you notice your leaves are curling on your Calathea, move it away from the window and see if they open back up. Because if they don't, it could also be root damage. So let's talk about this. The damage you see here is the result of root rot. And I'm still not sure how it happened. I've never had this happen in a Calathea before, but the leaves curled and no matter what I did, they wouldn't uncurl. And so once I knew it wasn't a light or a heat issue, I took the plant out of the pot and began to inspect its roots. And I found a few unhealthy, mushy roots, some tangled roots, some nodules that didn't look good. And I've never, like I said, had this happen before. So what I ended up doing was I cleaned the roots up as much as I could, keeping as many healthy remaining roots as possible, but getting rid of what obviously was beginning to rot. And then I amended its new potting soil even more than I usually do for a Calathea. It's very fast draining. And I would say within about a month, the new growth started coming through and it looks good. So it looks like that solved the issue there. The other thing though that I've noticed when leaves curl, this is the last one, it's as a result of cold damage. And cold damage looks like a lot of other issues. And the only way for you to know that it's cold damage is because you would know that the plant has been in the cold. So this is a Calathea, it's a Contina Freddy. And I ended up picking it up. It was either in late winter or early spring, and I had a video on it, wondering if I could save it. Here's what I learned from this and a few other plants, a few other Calatheas. Calatheas do not bounce back from cold damage. And when I found the plant, it had been outdoors, even though it was late winter, early spring here. And so it was in temperatures well below what is recommended for a Calathea. They are not hardy in temperatures below 65 degrees. And from what I understand, it had been outside overnight. And so I thought, well, maybe if I take it home, I can find a way to salvage it. As it turns out, I have yet to save a plant from cold damage. Sometimes if you know that your plant has been exposed to the cold and its leaves are curling like this and it's been maybe overnight in 60 degrees or cooler, Fahrenheit, I should mention, chances are the curled leaves are the result of cold damage. And if anybody has any tips on how to help a Calathea survive who's been exposed to the cold, I would love if you would leave comments, links, whatever you have, because I think that for a lot of people, that's something that we really struggle with. And I do have friends with Calatheas who their heater maybe goes out in the winter and they've lost pretty much all of their Calatheas if they weren't at home to act quickly. And so again, I'd love any further information from you. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is wilting leaves. And so what you're seeing here is a fusion white, and this is definitely a fusion if you look at it. It's not the best fusion white. You see a lot of what appear to be Maui Queen leaves mixed in with fusion white leaves. Still don't understand. This plant actually was the sort of ground zero for a spider mite infection that happened in my house a few years ago now. And one of the things that happened with it was what you're seeing. Its leaves suddenly began to wilt. And drastically, this happened within probably about I would say 5 hours. And so when this happened to this plant, it wasn't the first time I had seen it, and so I knew what to do. I knew what this was. This is what often happens when your potting soil, the soil isn't aerated, and so maybe it's not draining quickly enough. The roots aren't able to get oxygen. So one of the ways that you know this is happening is that your plant looks like this, but the potting soil, when you dig your fingers down, is wet around the roots. What you want to do then, or what I did, and what I've done that has successfully, as you can see, this is 12 hours, these photos apart, is I went and I repotted it and I amended the soil with a lot of perlite, making sure that it was fast draining. And so what happens is that when the soil becomes compacted around the roots and it can't drain, it's just holding water now, and it's almost kind of drowning the roots. The roots need to be able to take in oxygen, and when they stay wet with that compacted soil holding the moisture there, they're not able to take in oxygen, so they begin to sort of suffocate, and that's what you're seeing in the leaves. And when you see it in a Calathea, it looks very dramatic like this. And so that is the one good thing with a lot of what we're talking about today. The Calathea is a very dramatic plant. It will, when it experiences something, usually have an adverse sort of visual signal almost immediately. And so I was able to save this plant from suffocating, and I didn't save it from spider mites, unfortunately, but that's another story. So this is my video about Calathea leaf problems. I get a lot of comments and questions and DMs on Instagram about what to do with brown tips or with curling leaves, and so I thought I would just make a video and put it all out there for you. I do hope it was helpful. If you have any tips, any experience, anything that you'd like to share, please be sure to leave it in a comment, and until next time, be well and take care.